What's up everybody, I'm Maran and this is the 2021 Ford Bronco Wildtrak. So about the new Bronco, well, it's awesome that they brought it back here after so many years being away and having a really good competitor to the Jeep Wrangler finally. It's just awesome. I love how they went with the styling here, making it very retro, but still very modern at the same time. But I mean, I think they just nailed the proportions and just made it look so imposing. It's actually a little bit bigger than a Wrangler as well. So lengthwise, it's only about 1 inch longer than a Wrangler, but the width is where it really is a huge difference. And here, especially with the Wildtrak with the Sasquatch package, it's 5.5 inches wider than even a Wrangler Rubicon, and it's on a 4-inch wider track. And then even if you go for a non-Sasquatch version of the Bronco here, you're still 2 inches wider than a Wrangler, both for the track and for the width. And so, I mean, it's a very imposing look, and especially this one, having all the ground clearance it has and being so high off the ground here, it really is a sweet look, especially here in this red color. It really pops with the metallic red paint. I also love the graphics package that this one has in particular, with these Wildtrak decals here, both for the hood and down on the sides of the vehicle there. But I also love all the little details, like, the ridges, but the flatness that the hood has both at the same time. I also love these little tie downs you have on the edges of the fenders here. The gloss black grille looks great. Also, of course, those headlights look so cool. And it's just hilarious how wide these fender flares come out, but they are necessary to conceal these 35-inch tires this thing has, which are massive. They're on these beadlock capable wheels. In addition to these 35-inch tires you get on the Sasquatch, it also includes dual reservoir Bilstein dampers with 8.7 inches of travel, and all that combines to give you 11.5 inches of ground clearance here on the Sasquatch package. It's normally 8.3 inches of ground clearance on normal Broncos, and of course the extra ride height and stuff gives you a better approach, breakover and departure angles, but you also get locking front and rear diffs with the Sasquatch and a shorter final drive. And also a few other cool little touches here. So you have like mirrors that are attached to the cowl here instead of on the doors, and so that makes these doors much easier to take off. These doors are also frameless, so that's another big difference that you get different from a Wrangler, where of course you have the framed windows. And so cool little touches there to make these doors at least a lot easier to take off than the Wrangler. And this one, being the 4-door configuration, of course has the proportions stretched out a little bit, but you can of course get the Bronco in 2-door still, thankfully, which is awesome. And then out back there, it's nice and squared off, nice large spare tire there mounted. And I also love how you have the Bronco badge, a modern interpretation of it there in gloss black on the rear tailgate there. It's kind of a cool touch. I also love how the tailgate swings out, and it's separate from the glass there. Pretty classic setup. And so yeah, I think from every angle this thing looks absolutely awesome, and especially here at the Sasquatch package, it really stands out. The interior of the 4-door Bronco is pretty nice, with a cool blend of retro design elements along with high-tech touches like that big 12-inch touchscreen. It's also fairly roomy up front, especially compared to a Wrangler, thanks to that extra width you get here in the Bronco. I also really love the grab handles built into the dash there, but those frameless doors do mean that the doors don't have the same solid thunk as a Wrangler, and some of the materials also don't feel quite as nice as they do in a Wrangler. But moving on to the seats here, the leather is an extra cost option even on this Wildtrak trim, which is kind of interesting, but it does feel fairly nice for something that isn't a luxury vehicle. They're also heated seats, and they were pretty comfortable. The steering wheel is okay with a good 9/3 grip, but the leather felt a little cheap there, and the buttons were a little rubbery and felt like they could get worn out pretty easily over time. This one was also heated as well, thanks to an option package. The gauges are also pretty nice in the Bronco, with just a simple speedometer and a screen. That's it. The screen does show a bunch of great info though, like a big boost gauge you can even get, along with other auxiliary gauges and other off-road settings, in addition to all the normal stuff you can usually cycle through there. I did miss having an analog style tach though. That's one thing that you cannot get in that digital screen. But coming over to the center of the dashboard, the first thing you might see are all the diff lockers you have there right on top of the dash. There's also a bunch of auxiliary switches on the ceiling, which is a cool touch. But the main thing you'll probably see is the 12-inch touchscreen, which looks great, works pretty well too. It still has a volume and tune knob. It also has wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto, and that worked without issue, thankfully. A lot of other vehicles, it still is kind of glitchy with that wireless text sometimes, but no issues, thankfully, with this. One thing it is missing though is an off-road menu like we get on the Wrangler. So with the Bronco, you get much less information, way less toys to play with there in the screen like you get in the Wrangler. And one nice thing though is you do at least have a forward-facing camera to help you navigate trails the way this one is equipped. That is of course an option, but it's nice to have that. This one also does have the optional 10-speaker B&O stereo, which sounded pretty good considering they couldn't put speakers in the doors, but you can still tell most of the sound is coming out of the dashboard. But despite that, it still actually sounded better than I was expecting it to, and better than honestly I thought was possible for a setup like that. So I'm pretty impressed with that stereo nonetheless. Climate controls are simple and straightforward, and one other thing I really appreciated was the electronic four-wheel drive selector, which makes it much easier to change through your four-wheel drive modes than the heavy lever you still have to use in the Wrangler. The storage space is also pretty good for a vehicle like this, with a fairly large center bin that can also include a wireless charging pad if you get that option, along with USB-C and regular USB jacks. There's also 2 cup holders and a center armrest that's fairly soft but still a little cheap feeling. It's like vinyl-y whenever it should be leather, since this is a leather interior with that option package. But otherwise, that center bin is nice and large and includes a traditional power outlet in there, so good to have that. There's also little nets in the doors, but they aren't too usable, but considering the doors are removable, I can't really blame them for not having big pockets in the doors. The back seat is actually kind of interesting though here in the 4-door version, so you would think it'd be pretty roomy with how big this Bronco is, but you'd be wrong. Whenever I opened this thing up, I was really surprised. I'm like, wow, there's really not much space back there. It's less than an inch extra rear legroom than what you get in a 2-door Bronco. So it does seat 3 back there though, compared to the 2 seats you get in the back of a 2-door Wrangler. And you do have easier access thanks to those rear doors, of course, but that's about it. But I mean, it still is a usable back seat, and being 5'9", sitting behind myself, I had about 2 inches of legroom to spare thanks to little cutouts in the seat back there. Without that, my knees would be pretty close to the back of the seat. And those rear passengers also get 2 USB jacks and a house current plug, along with a fold down center armrest. And then cargo space in the back is really the main advantage of the 4-door actually over the 2-door, with 50% more cargo space than the 2-door version. So it's a great amount of space, but it still is a 2-step process to access it, of course, because you have to open the tailgate and get that huge spare tire out of the way before you can lift the glass. But it is nice to have the glass separate, as long as you don't mind that extra step. There's also a 12-volt power outlet back there as well. All right, so let's start up and go for a drive. The Bronco here has a unique Bronco key, which is a nice, cool little touch, and same shape as any other Ford key though, but nice little metal buttons there on the back. A little bit of a thicker key, but it's not too bad. And of course, it is keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start here in the Bronco. So you just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. All right, so setting off here in the Bronco, the first thing that I notice is this engine roars. So this one runs the 2.7 liter EcoBoost V6. That's the standard engine here in the Wildtrak trim, since it's towards the top of the pack here, and it's loud. Now, I'll talk about how it performs here in a little bit, but I mean, they didn't even have any kind of engine cover on it or anything, and so honestly it seems like it's even more engine noise than you get in a Wrangler, honestly. And it's a very agricultural V6 as well. It's not quite as smooth sounding as the V6 in the Jeep, but this definitely has a lot more punch to it than the V6 in the Jeep does, so I'll test that out here in a minute. But other things you'll notice is that I'm having to raise my voice here because these tires are noisy. Again, that just comes with the territory of having 35-inch off-road tires. So this isn't anything shocking, but there isn't very much sound insulation here. This one does have the extra sound insulation on this hardtop, but you still get lots of wind noise, road noise. That's all readily apparent from the first minute you start driving this thing. Another thing though, speaking of the good stuff that you notice immediately from the first minute of driving the Bronco here, is just this steering. I am so glad that this has such better steering than a Wrangler. Wrangler has the loosest, most imprecise steering I've ever encountered in a modern vehicle. Now, they used to say, well, that's because of the off-roading nature, and it's a Jeep, so give it a pass. But this shows you don't have to have that. This has nice and tight steering. Now, it's not, race car feeling or anything like that, but it just, is accurate and doesn't allow you to wander all over the place. You don't have to make a ton of little corrections to the steering constantly like you have to do in a Wrangler. So steering is awesome. Part of that is, it has rack and pinion steering. It also does have an independent front suspension, which is something you don't get in the Wrangler. And so that certainly is going to help. And also this vehicle, being a little bit wider for the track means that you're going to have a little bit of better stability out on the road. This isn't going to be quite as susceptible to being blown around by wind gusts, although it still is big and blocky and high off the ground. But, it's a little bit better, I think, in that regard as well, because today is actually a little bit of a windier day, and I haven't had any issues yet. But we'll see once we hit the highway how it does out there. But so otherwise now, with these Bilstein dampers, you'd say, well, maybe it's going to be a little bit stiffer ride. It's not too bad so far. Now, I haven't hit too many potholes just yet, but honestly, it feels pretty good and actually, very daily drivable. And, I don't think it's actually much worse than like a Bronco Sport, for example. I mean, it's certainly, maybe a little bit stiffer, but not by much. And so, I'd say that as far as daily driving goes, I can already tell you in the first few minutes that this is going to be a little bit easier to live with than a Wrangler would be for sure. Another thing I'm really appreciating about the Bronco here is that it's also very easy to drive, just as far as throttle response is really good. Brakes are very easy and normal feeling. You also have excellent visibility here in the Bronco. Nice large windshield, great square windows here. View out of the back is all great. I also just love the view over the hood here with those fenders and those little hooks they have on them. It's just a very cool view, and it just makes this car feel like a little bit of an adventure to be driving around in a Bronco, just because of the view you have. And that also does help, whenever you are off-roading, especially with those fenders, knowing exactly where you're placing them on narrow paths. You also do have 360 cameras available. This one does have that option that is available here on these higher trims, and so that'll give you even better visibility. All right, so let's do an acceleration. I'm going to go ahead and put it up into this sport mode. Believe it or not, you do have a sport mode here in this version of the Bronco, the Wildtrak. If you go for a Badlands, that gets swapped for a different mode. I believe it's like a rock crawling mode. This one also does have a Baja mode. So, and other lower trims of the Bronco won't have as many drive modes. Anyway, whenever you go into sport mode, it does put it into the 4 automatic mode. So we will be in 4-wheel drive here when we do this acceleration. And but yeah, let's turn onto this back road and see how it does. A little bit of a delay. Now it takes off. Woo. And it pulls strong. Wow, that is impressive. So the Bronco here runs the 2.7 liter EcoBoost V6 engine. It does 330 horsepower and 415 pound-feet of torque. It does a 6.3 seconds 0 to 60 is what it's quoted at. And I love you hear a lot of turbo whistling or whooshing there, which is kind of a cool touch. And it's kind of a funny sound, because I honestly thought the window was cracked or something for a minute whenever that turbo started going, because I was like, wow, that's like a sound I wasn't expecting. Anyway, it's tons of power. By the way, those horsepower figures are rated on premium fuel. You can run regular in this, you lose about 15 horsepower, and if you go for the 2.3 liter EcoBoost motor, the 4-cylinder in the Bronco here, then you lose about 25 horsepower going for its regular gas. And on the horsepower front, you only lose about 30 horsepower with the 4-cylinder over this V6, but the big thing you miss out on with the 4-cylinder is 90 more pound-feet of torque you get here with the V6, and so that's really what you're going to feel in the seat of your pants, is that extra torque for sure. And but it's punchy. Even though it didn't rip my head off the line there, I think that once you're up and rolling, that mid-range punch is where this thing is really going to pull like a freight train and feel pretty good, honestly. So, I mean, the 2.7 liter motor, I've been very impressed with. I already tested it out in an F-150 a few years back. A very strong, great motor, and so having it here in the Bronco is awesome. It's also paired up exclusively to this 10-speed automatic. If you go for the 4-cylinder, you can get a 7-speed manual. The 7th gear is just a crawler gear, basically, but 10-speed auto seems to be working pretty well so far, aside from, again, taking a second there to find the right gear and actually give me the acceleration. But otherwise, we're coming up some corners here. I'm not going to review this like a sports car, but I just want to see how it handles around my favorite little back road here. So it's not bad. I will say this definitely feels a lot better than a Wrangler. Now, is it as good as, other SUVs? Not really. Obviously, you have the off-road bias to this, so it's not set up for this at all. So I'm not going to knock it for not handling like a sports car. but it does do pretty good. You know, you still feel like you have lower limits. You have to be a braver person than myself to push this thing on a back road. But you know, it does pretty good. I mean, again, for normal daily driving kind of stuff, if you happen to have a few, you know, winding corners on your commute or something, just know this definitely does handle better than the Wrangler. If for no other reason, just the fact that the steering is actually precise, so you actually have some confidence with that. But you know, it still is heavy. I mean, this one, I think as tested, is over 4,700 pounds. It's very high off the ground, very, you know, top heavy and all that. So, you know, make no mistake, this isn't going to be, you know, amazing handling. There's a lot of other SUVs, even some like slightly off-roady SUVs that will handle better than this. You know, but I'd say that it's pretty good. Maybe, you know, it's closer to like a 4Runner or something like that with its TRD package, as far as how it feels just, again, behind the wheel, first off-the-cuff impressions here. But one thing I really love about the Bronco here is that you don't have a separate gear lever to put it into a different, you know, mode as far as the four-wheel drive system and the transfer case and stuff. So, you know, it's just push button on all Broncos. So like, for example, I can go out of sport mode here and I'm just going back to the normal mode, and it actually, with the drive modes, will automatically change over the four-wheel drive system. So it's now in two-wheel drive mode now that we're in the normal mode again. But I can also go ahead and just press these buttons on the fly and change those instead of yanking a heavy shifter. Like even the newest Wrangler still has like a shifter. You got to put a lot of muscle into moving that thing. No such issues here with this. Now, as far as transfer cases go, you know, there's a bunch of different configurations and stuff. Here on the Wildtrak, you get Dana 44 axles, and so, you know, it gives you a slightly different low gear versus what you got in the non-Dana 44. And, you know, there's all the spec sheets of what you get with each trim and all that kind of stuff. But the main thing here is that in this higher one, that's where you get the 4 automatic mode. So on the lower transfer case, you don't have the 4 automatic mode. You still have the 4 high, you can, you know, leave it in and stuff, but having the 4 automatic in this transfer case allows it to react on demand to wheel slip and, you know, pop it into, you know, putting the power to wherever it needs to put it. So it's very nice to have that here in these more advanced versions of the Bronco. Also, I'm no off-roader, so I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of how this does off-road or anything like that. But it does have like a trail turn assist where it can actually use one of the inside wheels to actually brake the vehicle and reduce the turning radius by about 40%. You also have trail control, which is like cruise control while you're out, you know, off-roading, and so that's for very low speeds. It also has the sway bar disconnect, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that stuff it does do, again, just with those drive modes, so you can have it set up, you know, and have some assistance there with that. So great that it, you know, gives you all those features. And now we're out on the highway here in the Bronco, and you can hear lots of road noise. There's some wind noise and all that as well. But otherwise, it's a nice cruiser. It is nice and stable, thankfully. So that is really great. And I did a road trip from Pittsburgh to Detroit and back in a two-door Wrangler when the JL Wranglers first came out. Wasn't a very enjoyable road trip vehicle for sure. This would be so much better out on the highway here. It's really so much nicer already. And this one also does have the optional adaptive cruise control system. So that gives you lane keeping assist, all that kind of stuff. You do have automatic emergency braking as standard in Broncos, and then if you go up to some of the even lower trim packages, those will give you a blind spot monitoring system. And but then, you know, you have to go up to, I think, the top 3 trims in order to get the option for adaptive cruise and the lane keep assist and stuff. And the adaptive cruise so far is working pretty well here, being able to be smooth with the starting and the stopping, and, you know, keeping a good following distance and all of that. The lane keep system, though, is more of a safety system. It's not really like a hands-free thing. Like Ford has the Blue Cruise hands-free system that they're rolling out in the F-150. No such system here on the Broncos. I feel like that's probably something a lot of Bronco owners aren't super interested in. And now getting off the highway here, one other thing I want to add is that you do have a little bit of nosedive like you would expect out of something with a softer suspension setup here for off-roading. And so that is one area where, you know, it has a little bit of drama and some of that off-roady fun for sure with the way it, you know, the nose wants to dive down. Although it doesn't seem to squat too much whenever I accelerate. I mean, it does lift up a little bit, but it's not as dramatic as the nosedive is whenever you hit the brakes. But anyway, yeah, it's a fun little thing to drive around for sure. But anyway, thanks to Ford, I'm going to have the Bronco here for an entire week, so I'm going to drive all over the place. Then I'll come back and give you guys my final real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing, its competitors, and anything else I noticed here during my week of driving. After spending a week with the Bronco and putting about 151 miles on it, it really grew on me. I'm usually not a big fan of off-road oriented vehicles, but the fun character of the Bronco is hard not to like. And with its better road manners, it's much easier to live with than a Wrangler. And I even got used to things like the noisy tires and the louder than average wind noise. One sound though that I didn't appreciate was the creaky hardtop, which seemed to get worse on cold days and just gave off this cheap vibe. My only other complaint is the 10-speed automatic still had to hunt for gears in certain situations and wasn't quite as responsive as I would like it to be. But the last two things I mentioned here are fuel economy and pricing. I'm sure most people buying a Bronco probably don't care about fuel economy, but for those that are curious, the 17 mile per gallon rating that it gets for both its city and highway ratings was spot on in my experience, and I got 16.8 mpg even with a little bit of idling mixed in. And this is actually pretty impressive considering I usually get about 1 to 2 mpg less than the city rating in most of the other press vehicles I review. Lastly, pricing here. So this one as tested was $61,000 or so, and Broncos start at $30,000 for a 2-door, but the 4-door models like this one start at about $35,000. And that pricing is extremely close to the Wrangler. I'm sure that's purely intentional. And a comparable Wrangler Rubicon with the Extreme Recon package comes out to $61,000 as well. So if pricing is equal, I would pick the Bronco every time for its extra power, its better driving dynamics, and its fresh design. Unfortunately, here at the end of 2021, Broncos are still hard to find for MSRP, sadly, thanks to the Ford dealers that love markups. So with current market conditions, the Wrangler is almost certainly going to be the better deal. If you can find one at MSRP though, either now or sometime in the future, I think it's definitely the one to get. But that's all of my thoughts on the Bronco. Let me know what you think about the Bronco in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. Thanks also to Ford for providing me with this Bronco to review, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.